Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an attendee in listen-only mode.
Services for over 15 years and has held her current role since January of 2015 in Bremerton, Washington. The school district serves over 5,000 children across 9 schools. She's been instrumental in the school food share program that started at Bremerton School District in 2016. On average, that program keeps 3,000 pounds of reusable food out of landfills per month and puts it into the mouths of people in the community who need it. All right, so first we'll get started with our first speaker, and we will switch over. Can you just quick show my screen? All right, so we're going to turn this over to Nayuri, and thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nayuri Hartunin. I'm the program manager at Washington Green Schools. We're an environmental education nonprofit that works out of Seattle, but we engage and support and guide schools throughout the state of Washington, K through 12, public or private. And we do that a variety of different ways through a certification program as well as some new curriculum that we've developed. And I'll be talking a little bit about those in a few moments, specifically about waste. And so thank you very much for being a part of this today. What I'm going to go over briefly is who we are as an organization, dive in a little bit into our certification program, which allows schools and students to take on environmental action projects within their school communities. And lastly, I'll tell you a little bit about our new curriculum that we developed with Seattle Public Schools called Zombie Guacamole, which addresses waste and decomposition issues, the cycling of matter and energy in an ecosystem, and also is driven by next generation science standards. So as an organization, our mission is to guide and support students and schools to become environmental leaders for the environment. And like I said before, we can do that with a variety of different things. Our main program is called certification, which I'll tell you about in a moment, but it allows students to be guided through a 6-step process to take on environmental action projects in any number of environmental categories, one of which is waste and recycling. And it's our vision that every child, each and every child in the state will be able to attend a green and healthy school, and that their schools will teach and model and practice environmental sustainability. And we hope to see this not only as just action projects taken on by some students, but hopefully one day sustainability being embedded into the classroom curriculum and instruction as well. So currently we're in about 460 schools throughout the state. There are over 2,800 schools in the state of Washington, so we're slowly making our way through all of them. We've been a nonprofit now for about 6 years, and so we're very proud to have over 460 schools participating in our programs one way or another. We're in 90 different school districts, 27 out of 38 counties in the state, and we're nearing 100,000 students served in our certified schools. Now, we work throughout the state. We are more heavily concentrated in parts of the state like Western Washington. Here we're in Seattle, as well as southwestern Clark County, where we have schools all the way out in Chelan and Spokane, which are on the eastern and central sides of our state as well. So we're very proud of that. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the waste, recycling, and composting kind of landscape that we're in right now, especially within Seattle. In January of 2015, there was a law passed that mandated composting in schools. So it had been encouraged, and at this point it became a mandate. So Seattle Public Schools, as well as the city of Seattle, now had to compost their waste. And compostable materials became prohibited from garbage starting on January 2015, and there is a potential fine for both citizens as well as schools if they put their food waste in the garbage can. We also communicated to the schools that this is a good thing. Not only is it the law and something that we should follow, but it's a venture that will end up saving schools money. Within Seattle Public Schools, research has shown that disposing of trash in the garbage costs nearly 4 times as much as recycling it or even composting it. And this was done through a pilot at 10 different schools in the area. And most of the pilot schools ended up reducing their garbage costs by over 24%. So when you expand that all out to the schools in the district, there are about 90 schools in the district, this could save Seattle Public Schools $100,000 annually. So this is also a financial benefit for schools. And lastly, Seattle Public Schools took this on as a way to demonstrate good citizenship and good behavior. Recycling and composting reduces our carbon footprint, of course. It diverts materials from the landfill, which students later learn doesn't just decompose beautifully into soil, but actually poses environmental challenges to us. And you can turn those products into usable products as well. And Seattle Public Schools views themselves, takes on the responsibility, rather, of modeling this environmental stewardship to their students, staff, and school communities. So this became part of their policy back when this mandate came about. So in that spirit, Washington Green Schools stepped up our programming and our curriculum development to help support these schools, as well as any school in the state that are taking on waste-related challenges. So we do this by providing teacher resources and support. We do annual teacher trainings in counties that we have a lot of participation in. So for instance, King County, those who are familiar with the state know that Pierce and Snohomish are also nearby in Western Washington. We'll do annual trainings of the teachers so that they can take back action project ideas and the support that they need to get projects started in their schools. We also provide, through our certification program, a step-by-step process. It's a 6-step process that schools can use to certify in waste and recycling. Like I said, we also offer this in energy, in water, in school grounds and gardens, and a couple of others. But waste and recycling is our most popular one. In addition to that, with our website, waggreenschools.org, we offer online resources, and classroom curriculum has become a new part of our program as well. And we also engage in school and community-wide recognition. So when schools certify with us, there is a part of the 6-step process is communicating student success out, not only to the school and the students within the school, but the school community. So local partners, parents, so they're aware of the work that's being done. And they get statewide recognition for the work they're doing through our organization. So as I mentioned before, certification is a 6-step process I wanted to go over briefly. We encourage schools who are interested in becoming a Washington Green Schools to build a green team. So this can look like a variety of different things depending on where your school is located or who is interested. But basically, it's the students, the teachers, the staff, maybe it's a custodian, maybe it's a lunchroom monitor, maybe it's a local recycling plant. Those people coming together to support a waste and recycling initiative at the school. We also have students assess their school to get a baseline for where they're at in terms of their waste, understanding if they have any contamination that's going on in their bins, how much cost and how much waste is actually being generated at the school, so they have somewhere to start. And that information will inform step 3, which is making a lasting change. This is when students decide, okay, we're going to monitor our school lunch waste. So we'll have people standing by the bins, as you see in this picture here. We'll create signs that communicate to students exactly what item goes where, what's compostable, what's recycled, and what is indeed bound for a landfill. They can engage in other types of communication efforts with local partners in the community, and this is all facilitated with Washington Green Schools if they so choose to use us as help, or they might already have an idea of what they want to do and they can run with that as well. We're very flexible in supporting the schools in whatever waste challenge they want to take on in whatever way they'd like to do that. Step 4 is verification and reflection. So this is a time where they review their school again, do another audit to see, in fact, how much waste were they able to divert out of a landfill and into recycling and composting. They can look at, again, their dumpster size, the amount of the frequency of the dumpster being emptied on a weekly or biweekly basis. What was the cost to the school? Were there any savings? Whenever there's monetary savings, administrators are happy to see that. So that's one way for this project to get the ball rolling for the school to become a greener place. Is when money is saved and students are involved, it's an exciting thing to see. Step 5 is sharing your story, which I mentioned earlier. This is where we help communicate the success of these students, not only to their school, but sometimes we might share on social media or connect with a local publisher or newspaper and share their story through there. And lastly, we help them get certified. So they get a flag, a certificate. We might come out to the school and present at an assembly. It's just all about bringing positive light and attention to these students who are taking time out of their day and taking on a project that they're interested in that they didn't have to, but once they got involved, they got so excited and driven by this that environmental action just organically came about. So we're excited to see that and happy to celebrate that. So as I mentioned before, one of the reasons you might want to be a Washington Green School is because you can have a great deal of conservation of resources, and that sometimes equates to savings. So for instance, last year we had 14 schools that participated in the certification of the waste and recycling environmental category, and we had a considerable amount of savings by student by month. And here's a picture of one of our schools sorting their waste. You'd be surprised how interested students are to get dirty and to actually do the waste sorting themselves. Sometimes adults are hesitant about whether students want to be involved, and really that's never been an issue. K through 12, they're eager to get in there and do their part and feel like they have control and power over their situation. And again, going on that theme of student engagement, these projects, these certification projects, extends classroom learning. It's not just a science class for 5th grade or a high school environmental science class. It allows students to not only strengthen their knowledge and skills by speaking to fellow students who are interested in this, but they apply it in the context of a real world problem, so to speak. So in their own school, in their own communities, what kind of change can they make? And of course, through this, they practice critical thinking skills, collaboration and communication skills, and this helps them become leaders for the environment in the future. Here we have, again, pictures of students all throughout the schools that we work with. We have a stenciling project in the upper right-hand corner where students were careful about what chemicals were being dumped on their school grounds, like paint, into the drains that eventually led into Puget Sound, which is of critical importance to us here in Seattle. And the bins and the monitoring at lunchtime is where a lot of students will take action and see great results. So I wanted to highlight 3 success stories briefly throughout our state that focused on waste and recycling. Hopefully these will be very inspiring to you. We'll start with Hillcrest Elementary. They're a school of 569 students, and they're located on Whidbey Island in Island County, so on the very western side of the state. The school is a pre-packed school, meaning they don't have a cafeteria where their food is heated and served. Instead, they receive their lunches in sealed packages. So they might get green beans in a package, or they might get a fish stick in a package. And these are served directly to the classrooms where the students will eat them. And they were using disposable trays and generating a lot of waste per day. And since they don't use reusable trays, since there's no place to wash them on site, they decided to switch to compostable trays. Now, Hillcrest thought really creatively about this. They're located near a Navy base. So they arranged to have their compostable trays stacked, boxed up, and picked up by the Navy once a week to have them composted on their military composting facility site. And this unique local partnership was just one part of their school's success. In addition, students helped monitor and sort their classmates' waste during lunch. Their food scraps were used as compost in their school garden, and whatever food they grew in their garden was then sent to a local food bank. So we have a whole system here of good environmental action around waste. It's also important to note that the principal was a real leader in this initiative. Teachers were also embedding this project into their classroom learning. Parents and lunchroom staff were also on board. And so success like this really happens when the community comes together. And do keep in mind, though, that this was a more than a 2-year process. So it took some time to get this off the ground. But once they did, it was very successful. And their efforts actually resulted in them receiving not only statewide recognition from us, but nationwide recognition as a green ribbon school. So we're very, very proud of the work that they've done. Heritage High School is down in Clark County in the southwest corner of the state. Now, Heritage High School's Environmental Club collected single-use bottles across campus to create an educated estimate of how many they toss on campus each year. And the results? Upwards of 60,000 plastic bottles. The team wanted then to share this with the school community and for them to be able to visualize exactly how much waste this was. So they brought the waste they generated over just 1 week to the gym during an assembly, and you can see that photo there. When the school community was able to really visualize in a tangible way the waste that they had been generating collectively, they banded together to reduce the impact. And they did this by working with a local reusable water bottle manufacturer to design a school-spirited bottle with their school logo that students could purchase for a reasonable $5. And in addition, they partnered with the school district to have water bottle filling stations installed in their school to cut back on plastic waste and, of course, encourage healthy hydration as well. And so this is a school of 1,800 students, and they made a huge change. And I think it's also important to note that this is a school with 49% free and reduced lunch, which is above average in our state. And lastly, Chelan Middle School, quick story here. There are approximately 345 students with a 61% free and reduced lunch rate. And they're in Chelan County in the central part of the state. They worked in conjunction with the Chelan High School, and they kicked off a composting and recycling initiative to address a huge waste problem that they had on their shared campus. And thanks to a coordinated effort of students and teachers, they've managed to cut their landfill-bound cafeteria trash by 60%. And what's more, they created a food share box wherein 90% of uneaten whole foods like their milk and fruit is now being redistributed to kids in need in their community. So it's not only taking care of environmental challenges, but I think that universal value of community and helping those that we live near.
So we'll be taking questions in about 5 minutes. And so if you have questions you'd like to type in, please type them in, and we'll be asking 2 questions of Nayuri right afterwards, and then we'll get to the rest of the questions later.
Perfect. So I want to transition now to the curriculum we just developed called Zombie Guacamole. About 1.5 years ago, we started having conversations with 3 different departments within Seattle Public Schools. The first one was research conservation, who normally work with schools to bring in the bins that were needed to direct the correct waste to the right place. But with the composting mandate, that became essential and a big task at hand. So that's something that department was managing. We also have the self-help team at Seattle Public Schools, which is, it's an oddly named department, but essentially they work with school grounds and gardens, putting in gardens in the school campuses. And they felt like they needed more support and more help with that, and for the students to be aware of it, not for just a project to occur on the campus without the students really being aware of what it was about. And also the science curriculum team had a major challenge on their hand. Next generation science standards, the new standards that the state has adopted, was going to be assessed actually this coming year. And so they need to rewrite rather an enormous amount of their curriculum in these coming years, and they'll be assessed on that next year. And so we decided, wow, it looks like all of these departments have something in common. They have this need for what eventually became Zombie Guacamole, our curriculum about waste and decomposition for 5th grade. So what we noticed was, after looking at 5th grade curricula for science, that literally 2 lessons remained from the old curricula that was aligned to NGSS. So we created a curriculum that hit on these 2 standards, obtaining and combining information about ways individual communities use science ideas to protect the Earth's resources and the environment. So this is the human impact piece. And we also hit on this standard, developing a model to describe the movement of matter among plants, animals, decomposers, and the environment. So this program now is being piloted in 7 Seattle Public Schools among about 12 different teachers in their classrooms. And so far, the results have been really very positive. Teachers are finding it an invigorating and engaging way to teach. Students are actually engaged and curious to find out what Zombie Guacamole is all about, and I was actually just about to tell you. So we start this entire unit with a story, a phenomenon, for those of you who are familiar with NGSS. And it's about a researcher from the University of Arizona who was digging through landfills in the early 90s, trying to study human behavior, and discovered a bowl of guacamole at the bottom of a 25-year-old landfill. And when he opened it up, it was perfectly preserved, green and soft, and like it had been thrown away just an hour before. What's going on here? That is the puzzling phenomenon that our fifth graders are now tackling, and they're learning and guiding themselves through learning by using a model to describe what's going on in a landfill, and that model will eventually inform what a compost pile might look like. So this curriculum not only talks about what decomposition is, why it's important, but also ends with action. So students are able to start a monitoring program in their lunchrooms or a compost pile on their campus. There are a number of ways that they can be engaged in waste and recycling, and we're really excited to see the future of this curriculum. And so I had a brief video. If we have a moment, I will just leave this up here. This is just a picture of some of the landfills that students have been drawing at Hazelwolf, one of our schools that has been piloting our program.
Great, and thank you so much, Nairi. And just so people know, the slides are available in the GoToWebinar pod, and you can download that and see the video that Nairi has embedded. So a couple of questions come up, and there's been some themes in the question. So one of the themes really is, how do you get funded to do this work? And is this something schools pay for the certification and the access to these, or, so there was a general question about funding.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we provide all of our certification programs for free, and that means that we are funded by other people in order to be able to provide that service. And so our funding comes from a variety of different places, from individual donors all the way up to companies like Boeing and McKinstry, the Department of Commerce. And so we're very lucky to have that support so that we can provide these services for free. In terms of our curriculum, we're still in development phase, and so we've been funded to develop that. And we'll have to see what the future looks like. Maybe this curriculum can be adopted by school districts, because we'd love to see top-down change rather than change occurring only from the bottom up. We are actually entering fundraising season right now. There are many opportunities to give big in May, and we're just happy that we're able to provide these resources for teachers to make it accessible for them as well as their students, regardless of where they are in the state.
Great, thank you very much. So another question that came up from a lot of askers, and I'll summarize, is how do you collect the data to prove that these programs are effective in schools, and how do you communicate that data to schools in a way that they can take additional action?
Yeah, evaluation is an incredibly important aspect of what we do, and it's a very challenging aspect of what we do because we're really focused on behavior change. The data that I was showing earlier comes from that certification process that I was talking about. That 6-step process is actually called a report card, and we have teachers and students fill it out and send that back to us so that we can see their audit and their verification data. So for instance, when it comes to waste, we ask them to tell us how large their dumpsters are, how full they are at the end of the week, how often they are picked up, what the contamination rate of those are, so that if there are changes made to those numbers, we are able to track that. In terms of 21st century learning skills and environmental stewardship and leadership skills, we do surveys of both teachers and students, as well as focus groups, to get a sense of how durable these behaviors are. Are they taking these behaviors home? Or do students feel prepared to take on environmental challenges before and after engaging with our certification program or taking one of our curricula? So that's part of our evaluation plan, to track 21st century learning skills, environmental leadership skills, and then the conservation data, which comes from the report cards. That's something we'll continue to expand upon because it is a very important piece of any environmental education work.
Great. I just want to note that there's a lot of questions about some of the resources that Nairi has mentioned, and those are available on the Washington Green Schools website, which is available on the screen. And you can also reach out directly at the info@washingtongreenschools.org.
Absolutely.
So I know there's a lot more questions, and we will revisit some of those questions as we get to the kind of end of the presentation this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're at in the country. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mary Beth Marcella. And again, she will be talking to us about her program for assessing the waste in her schools and cafeteria. Mary Beth?
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with everyone today about some of our work in Wellesley. I'm the Sustainable Energy Administrator, as Vicki mentioned earlier. And by way of outline, I'm going to first talk about the collaborative nature of the work we've been doing and the frameworks that we found really useful. I'll go into our assessment goals and design and results, and then talk a little bit about how we translated those results into action, and I'll end up with some acknowledgements. So first of all, it's important to, I think, point out that before starting this project, there really wasn't any recycling or food recovery happening in Wellesley Public School cafeterias. Shortly before we started this endeavor, some kids, some students at Bates School started a share table and a donation program that helped to kickstart this effort. But the Sustainable Energy Committee and the 3R working group in Wellesley recognized that among the 5,000 students in Wellesley, we have 7 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. There was really an opportunity to make some positive changes in the area of sustainable materials management in the cafeterias. And so what they did as a kickoff was to convene a meeting among town department heads, school administrators, and community members who came together. And what they did was actually watch an EPA Sustainable Materials Management webinar like the one we're doing today, and that really got the conversation started. At that meeting, the Bates principal stepped forward and said she'd be interested in pursuing these ideas at Bates, and from there we put together a stakeholder meeing. And I thought I'd point out, the kind of people who are at the meeting, because teamwork is a constant theme through this process. So we had the food services director there, the principal, the custodian, parents, green team and green school members, and our natural resources commission representative. And from that meeting, we made a decision to join the US EPA's Food Recovery Challenge and WasteWise programs. And those have been important for many reasons. One, being a part of these programs has given us added credibility and legitimacy as we presented this effort around town and got people to join in, like the many groups here that are pictured on this slide that were such an important part of the effort. It also gave us a structure. We knew that we need to do an assessment, we need to implement a pilot, and then evaluate it. So it made us accountable, and it gave us a roadmap to follow. We also, it generated some excitement because the kids at Bates were pretty excited that they were part of the first K-12 school in New England to join the Food Recovery Challenge. And then probably most importantly, it gave us tremendous resources in people like Janet Bowen and Chris Beeling at EPA, because they were always ready to answer our questions and give us advice. And they were there for us to bounce ideas off of, and I can't emphasize enough how valuable that was. So then moving on, we started to think about, well, what do we want to learn from this assessment? Clearly, we were going to be getting our hands literally dirty, and we wanted to do it well and do it thoroughly the first time. We knew we were going to obviously be separating food waste from recyclables and trash, but we also made the decision to separate out liquids, and I'll talk a little bit more later about why we were glad we did that. We were also curious about how waste generation varied with some other variables. So for example, how did waste generation vary with the age of the student? And how did it vary between home and school-bought lunches? Similarly, how did waste generation vary with particular menu items? These were questions we had because at the end of the day, of course, we wanted to come forward with a set of real recommendations and improvements that we could make. We knew, of course, that we wanted to engage students, minimize disruption to the school day, and rely on volunteers as much as possible because, of course, school faculty and staff are very busy. So then we also turned to the EPA's food recovery hierarchy to help us parse out how we wanted to organize the food waste part of this. And, clearly from the hierarchy, we knew that we wanted to separate out donatable items, separate animal feed from composting, and so forth. And so our assessment categories look like this. Each of these bins represents a different separation of waste. So we have the sharing or donation items, the animal feed, which is the fruits and vegetables. And then we separated simple from complex compost because we use compostable trays in our cafeteria. They can also be recycled in single stream recycling if they're clean. We wanted to separate those to get a handle on the difference there. The complex compost, of course, is the food that's not suitable for the animals or donation. Then we had single stream recycling items, trash, liquids, which were mostly milk, and then napkin packets, which were napkins and utensils that are bundled together in our cafeteria. And this is how we set up our sorting system in the lunchroom. So for each of those categories, such as animal feed or compost, we had 2 bins. And then we also had those 2 bins allowed us to separate, for example, the 5th grade waste from the kindergarten waste. That allowed us to get a handle on how waste varied with age. During the other lunch periods, we separated school lunch waste from from the waste that from kids that brought lunch from home. And we kept those bags separate throughout the process as we weighed. We did this over a 1-week period, 3 lunch periods per day. We had about 10 volunteers helping out per day. And of course, the kids played a really essential role in helping with the sorting. They were tremendous. Supplies that we used, not surprisingly, plastic bags and blue recycling bins for most of the items. We used the white white bin for donations. We had our data sheets and clipboards. We used a stopwatch because we did time the duration of the sorting process. We tried to make it more efficient each day. We wore gloves, obviously. And then this liquid receptacle was actually devised by Al Martinetti, our school custodian. He took a used wax bucket for floor wax and just repurposed it with a funnel. And it turns out this is a great way to collect liquids in the cafeteria. It's the perfect height for children. He has it on a dolly that he also built, and that's been very helpful, not only during the assessment, but during our pilot as well. And these are the supplies we used for weighing. Again, data sheets and clipboards. Tarps were useful. Something not pictured here is actually a camera, because we did take pictures. Shovel and gloves. And then we used actually regular bathroom scales that we sort of calibrated to each other, and those proved to work really well. And another important part of the assessment was the education piece. So the school principal allowed us the luxury of an all-school assembly. And at that assembly, we were able to talk to the kids in the broader school community about why we were doing the assessment, what we hoped to learn from it, and how it would run, and what their part would be in the process. So that when the kids came into the cafeteria during the assessment days, they knew what to expect. In addition, this flyer that I showed earlier was on every table, so the kids could look at it, and the volunteers visited every lunch table prior to the sorting process and talked to the kids about how to sort and what counted, for example, as animal feed versus compost, etc. So that education piece was very useful. So weighing and recording was straightforward. We made note of the lunch menu for the day, and we counted donation items. So for example, how many cheese sticks, how many carrot bags and napkin packets. But for everything else we were weighing, we knew that that's how we would be reporting to EPA. And we kept, again, the school and home items separate from the waste that kindergartners and 5th graders generated. We just went through the whole list of categories. And this gives you a sense of how much animal feed we collected in one day, so about 17 pounds. This is the complex compost, which is the breads and chicken nuggets and things. This is one day's worth of the compostable trays. And you can see that one of the things that we observed was it would be good to eliminate the trays altogether. And if not, it would be probably useful to have the kids stack these trays at the end of lunch. And that's what we end up doing, as you'll see. This was the recycling and for single stream. And again, these larger salad and sandwich containers are also more manageable when they're stacked. Turns out our food services director has identified a more sustainable packaging now that he's going to be trying out, so that we'll be getting rid of these plastic containers, which is great. But these are a summary of our results from the assessment. And one of the things that surprised us was that liquids actually comprises 25% by weight, approximately, of the total weight. And when you put animal feed and compost together, you're getting close to 50% of the total weight of the waste. Another important takeaway is that if you look at this chart at everything listed above trash, those are more sustainable endpoints than the landfill if you're looking at donation and composting and liquid diversion, for example. And if you do divert all of those materials, you actually end up decreasing your landfill-bound waste by 93%. So taking 371 pounds of total waste and getting it down to just 27 pounds of trash is what's possible when you look at what we found is possible when we looked at what exactly was leaving our cafeteria. So that gave a pretty satisfying result. In addition, we found that school lunch waste equals about 4 times the amount that home lunch waste weighs. So we also found that older kids generate about the same amount of waste as younger kids do. And we had some preliminary observations that when a lunch menu item was less popular, it tended to generate a little bit more waste per lunch, which isn't so surprising, but sort of an interesting observation nevertheless. And so we came away from the assessment with some clear recommendations that clearly doing donation, diverting liquids from the landfill, recycling and composting were really worthwhile. We also, through observations, confirmed that it does really help if you use reusable napkins and drink containers and utensils in your home lunches. And for school lunches, lots of things that could be improved in terms of eliminating trays and plastic containers and using dispensers for things like napkins and utensils and condiments and so forth. And we've been talking to our food services director about all of those ideas. And then what we did after the assessment was circle back with the town departments that were part of this process and talk to them about the best ways forward. There's clearly a lot of opportunities here, and came to some decisions about the fact that we would phase our pilot so that we would first, because we really weren't doing any of this in the cafeteria yet, and it would be a big change, there was a consensus around starting first with liquid diversion and recycling and focusing on that, and then phasing in the composting once we got all of that running really smoothly. And that allowed us to build some trust and lay a strong foundation for making bigger strides in the future. So what we did first was to get the 5th graders involved in forming a recycling leadership team. So lots of 5th graders volunteered for this, and they designed how the recycling and liquid diversion would actually be set up in the cafeteria. They developed all the signage, and they also ran an all-school assembly so they could teach the school community about why we were doing this in the cafeteria and how it would work, and they did a really great job with that. And this is how the program works. And this is what it looks like at Bates, where the first bins in white are for donation, then the liquid diversion. And I have to say that what the custodian does with that is he takes the liquids and he diverts it down a slop sink, which then goes to an anaerobic digester plant. The bins are for the recyclables, the trash, and this is at the end is where the kids stack the trays and plastic containers. And overall, this has been actually an improvement from the perspective of custodians. They love getting the liquid out of the trash. It makes the trash bags lighter and it prevents leaking. And the stacking of the trays and plastic containers also decreases the volume. So the Bates custodian is actually using fewer plastic bags and making many fewer trips to the dumpster, which is really helpful. This is just a schematic of the same setup. And this shows the results of our pilot. So we went back and measured, and we determined that we're diverting 40% of the previously landfill-bound waste, which we feel good about. As we phase in composting, we'll be able to get up to that 93% diversion, which we're looking forward to doing that. And in terms of next steps, we are rolling out this pilot to other schools in Wellesley. We have some really enthusiastic and committed principals and parents in the other schools. We're expanding our food rescue efforts to incorporate not only post-consumer donations, but also pre-consumer donations from the kitchens. And as I said, we're also looking into developing the compost piece of this. It's inspiring to hear the previous speaker talk about what's going on in Washington State. And just a huge thank you. This has been a huge effort. I don't even have a slide big enough to write everybody's name that deserves to be recognized. But this is our Bates assessment team and the Bates and town employees who've been really essential to this effort, and can't thank them enough for their hard work. And I also want to thank EPA, Chris Beeling and Janet Bowen, and also Carol and Dan at Mass DEP, because they've been super supportive and helpful throughout the process as well. And thanks very much.
Great, Mary Beth, thank you very much. And we've had lots of questions come in as you were speaking. And if people have additional questions, please submit them, and we'll be going back to some questions after we've had some initial ones. So one question that came up really regularly is, what do you do with the liquid waste? If you could describe how you are managing that and where that's going.
Sure, great question. We collect the liquid waste in those containers that I showed, and then the custodian takes that liquid and pours it down an industrial sink that's in the school, and that then goes to Deer Island water treatment plant, which actually has anaerobic digestion on site. And we cleared that in order to make sure that it was okay to do that. We cleared that with our Department of Public Works and those folks to make sure it was okay. This was mostly skim milk that's going down the sink, so it's very low, or if any, fat content, and that's how we do that.
Great, thank you very much. So there's another question here about engaging all the different players in this. Everything from how do you engage kind of school staff and allowing them to take time out of lunch, to engaging with the fifth graders, to the green team. So if you could just talk, and kind of all of the variety of partners where the material is going. So if you could just talk about how do you engage with those partners, and what are some of the messages and strategies you use to do that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that did help us at that beginning, as I mentioned, was that using the EPA's webinar. And I do think that bringing people together around a webinar that showed what was possible in schools in terms of improving sustainable waste management was very useful. So Janet Bowen from EPA actually came out to Wellesley for that showing and was there to help with the discussion and to answer questions. So that turned out to be a really good way to kick this off, is to bring people together around the webinar. In terms of getting them there, we invited them just through phone calls and emails to encourage them. I mean, of course, these people were giving up precious time out of their day, but I think we were able to make a good enough argument that there was a lot of benefit to be gained from learning more about sustainable materials management. And that webinar did really help us to launch things. And then from there, getting people, getting people to come to the smaller stakeholder meeting was actually easy because we were all on the same page and sort of had the same goals in mind at that point.
Great. So in the same vein, was there any pushback, and if so, from whom and why?
By and large, people have been extremely supportive and cooperative. I say that without question for all the departments. I think one of the areas that's a little bit harder is sometimes with health departments. That's not just for Wellesley, but for communities in general. Our health department works extremely hard and has a lot of responsibilities. And it turns out that food donation is a fairly new thing for health departments to have to grapple with. It's not, as I understand it, food donation is not a standard, a course or a standard protocol that health departments have been trained in. And so it really then becomes the responsibility of the people wanting to do food rescue and food waste management. It becomes their responsibility to help to educate their health departments and help to do as much of the standard operating procedure development and chain of custody development that's required. So I think that that might be maybe one of the more challenging areas, just because food rescue and the role of health departments is a newer area to be tackling.
Great, thank you for that answer. And I think that's a great lead-in to our next presentation, where I know that they struggled with many of those health department issues in terms of kind of food rescue. And so I'm going to hand it over to Lynn Johnson with Bremerton School District. And then as she's speaking, I also want to just draw your attention to a document that is available for download through the webinar, which is a toolkit that has been developed based on the work that was done in Bremerton with collaboration from many people around kind of Seattle area and the Pacific Northwest region. So turn that over to Lynn.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm super honored to be here today with these very lovely ladies that just impress me so much all the time I'm around them. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. But so my name's Lynn Johnson, and I work with the Bremerton School District. I've been there for a little over 2 years, and but I've been in school food service for over 15 years, and have during that duration of time, during the lunchtime, you always see lots of food getting thrown away that could be reused or shared with somebody who might need it. And there's just so many barriers that every time you try to change something like that, there's so many barriers that you come across. You think if the kids had more time to eat lunch, that maybe they could eat more, but then you have the barrier of, their lunchtime is short because if there's so much teachable time that they have during the day, so that it always gets cut out of the lunchtime, it seems like. So we're kind of stuck there. Students are required to take certain items to make a reimbursable lunch, so we don't really have a lot of leeway there. We weren't allowed to have share tables because of the health department rules. We weren't allowed to put food that had already been used back into our program because that was against the USDA rules. So there were so many barriers that were always there, keeping us and preventing us from taking food that was reusable or shareable out of the trash and giving it to the community or whatever. So it's just kind of like one of those things that you go to work every day and you see it happening, and it's really frustrating, but you kind of don't know where to go or what to do to fix it. Well, a little over a year ago, I got a call from Vicki with the EPA, and she called me up and asked if she could come visit our district and kind of look and see what kind of waste we had in our cafeterias. And I wasn't really sure what she was getting at with that. I thought she was just kind of curious. Somebody from, when she said EPA, I was thinking education, the E was like for education or public association, something. I wasn't thinking the EPA. I had no idea that's who she was with and what she was coming for. So she came and visited me at my office with a colleague, and when she handed me her card, I then realized that she was from the Environmental Protection Agency, and at that point I became nervous because then I was thinking that maybe we were doing something wrong with our waste, maybe we had too much waste, and we were going to get, chastised from the EPA. But that isn't what she was there for. We had a really good visit. She explained to me what she was trying to do was to try to help me figure out a way to keep, so we could make some change to keep this reusable, as she called it, wasted food out of the landfills and into the community. So after she left, I was really excited, and I was not really sure how we were going to get this, kind of like where to start. I wasn't really sure what to start. So I talked with some of my, oh, sorry. Oh, there you go. Sorry, I'm a little technically challenged here. So we decided that the first thing we'd need to do is to get the principals on board with this thought, because it would impact their schools. And well, and another thing Vicki had told me is that there wasn't any other district that had more than like maybe one school on board. And so, of course, I took that challenge and thought, okay, well, if there isn't anybody else, we're going to do it. We're going to get all of our schools on board. So I figured the way to talk to all the principals was to go to this assistant superintendent, because he's the one who addresses the principals on a monthly basis. So I figured I'd go talk to him. Well, he then told me that the first thing I would have to do is get the school board approval, because he wasn't going to ask the principals to do anything like that unless the school board approved it to begin with. So I prepared a speech or presentation to present to the board, and I met with them and explained to them what we were doing, and that Vicki had visited from the EPA and what her point of view was from it. And after I shared this with them, the school board was 100% for it. They were so, I mean, they were almost brought to emotional tears over it, to think that we could take the food that was being thrown away that's perfectly edible and save it for our community. In our district, we have, we're over 60% as a district free and reduced food and percentages. And so we have a lot of need in our community. We have a lot of food banks. We have a lot of rescue centers where this food could go to the community instead of going into the landfill. So they were all for it. They even gave me their blessing if I had to get, because at the beginning, when this was all first starting, we thought we had to get refrigerators, a separate refrigerator for each school to store the food in that was coming off of the share tables. And that was kind of like a hurdle, because as you know, most school districts don't have extra money sitting around to go buy an extra refrigerator for each school. So but the district had, the school board gave me the blessing to go ask businesses if they would be willing to donate a refrigerator or whatever, which was a pretty big thing, that they would even be willing to do that. So they were completely for it. But they told me before I did anything, I had to get the approval from the health department, because they had said in the past that the health department did not approve share tables, and they had never heard of them allowing a school to donate food that had been on the share table, yet alone have a share table. So that was like, I was like, okay, you know, I'll call the health department and get that going. Well, it wasn't as easy as it sounds. I first called the health department here in Kitsap County, Washington, and talked to Jim Zimney, who's our health department representative. And it was a pretty short conversation. The first one we had, he was like, no, we don't allow share tables. It's, you know, something that we don't allow. So pretty much no. And that was about it for the first conversation. So I got off the phone and I, go back to work, and I'm thinking about it and thinking about it. So I thought, it's just not okay to just shut it down that quickly and that easily. So I called him again next day, and before he had a chance to tell me no, I wanted to explain to him what we were trying to do with this, and that where our goals were, and it wasn't just Bremerton. This was something that was coming from, a larger scale. It was something that coming from the EPA. We're looking at it from keeping food out of the landfills, more of that perspective. And it was about a 30-minute conversation that time, in which he explained to me that, well, he thought it was a great idea, and it made sense, but it's something that comes from the state level. It's not something that he can change. It comes from the state verbiage in their health department rules that they have to then carry out down to the county level. And I said, well, how do we get it changed at the state level? And he goes, well, that doesn't happen very often. It very rarely happens. And they only visit the rules and the change verbiage every so often. It's not even something they do every year. And I was like, oh, well, okay. So I got off the phone with them then and thought a little more about it. And I called him back one more time and I said, okay, so how do we get it changed? How can we go forward to make this happen? Like, how do we contact the state person? And he said, all right, I'll contact my boss, his supervisor. And he said, now let him know what you're trying to do. And we'll just kind of see where it goes from there. But he goes, I know where they're having a regional meeting coming up, like in the next few weeks or something, and maybe he can bring it up at that and see where it goes. So got off the phone with him, and I said, okay, I was thinking about it. So I kept emailing him periodically, like every week. I emailed him to see if he had heard anything, and I didn't hear back from him for a while, but I didn't realize that during this time, they were actually having a regional meeting. And this was brought up there, and there was a lot of chatter about it and a lot of talking about it. And I guess it spilled over from that and went beyond the state level to all the way up to the federal level, because the state gets their rules from the federal level, which also comes from the USDA. Part of it comes from there. So I didn't realize that this would go that far up, which it made me really happy that, and I know that there's other districts that it wasn't just coming from me or from our state. There's lots of states and lots of people that have been asking about having some change in this verbiage in the ruling with the health department. So I'm certainly not taking credit for all that. I'm just saying that it was great that to be part of that here in Washington State. So what we got back from them, he did get back to me, and what he said, for now, this was last year, before this school year, is we would be able to file a waiver or a variance for each school that would be having a share table /donation table, and we'd have to include in that waiver, it's called a HISUP or HACCUP or whatever some people call it that. It's HACCP, which stands for Hazardous Analysis Critical Control Point. We had to have that plan in there, which explained how we were going to keep the cold food cold, how we were going to transport it to keep it, prevent it from getting bacteria in it. How do we know whether the food had been tampered with? Just basically what was our plan going to be to keep the food safe. So we had to include that with each variance, and then we had to contact the recipients of the donations and find out how they were going to receive the food, how they would keep it cold, what they would do on their end to keep it safe before they handed it out to the community so that nobody, would be getting sick. So we were really fortunate that we got two places to take our donations, the Salvation Army in Bremerton and the Bremerton Food Line. And what I mean by we were really fortunate to have them is they have their own trucks that would be willing to come pick up our donated food at our schools, and also their trucks have refrigeration on them. So that was like a huge plus in our favor, to get the health department to even go one step further and even agree with it more. And so we got the variances signed, we got them handed in, sent them to the health department. They gave us a thumbs up for go ahead and start that. We started it, I believe, about a year, this time probably last year, we started it in our school district. So we were able to, yes, okay, so then the next part was work. So I got the health department, I got the board approval, got the health department approval. So then I had a talk with, I had a staff meeting with my staff. I explained to them what we were doing. And because they also see the food that gets wasted and goes in the trash, they, for the most part, were very enthusiastic about doing this and keeping the edible food out of the trash. And so we had to, oh, I'm off my, I'm trying to keep it all together here. So one of the things that Vicki had said when we got the variance, the thumbs up from the health department, she said, okay, what can we do to help? The EPA, we have some money from a grant that we can help you guys get some of this started. So we worked with the EPA. They got us some signage made for our share tables, and they got us some bins that we also put signs on, and they also came over. They were able to send some of their student helpers over in the very beginning to help at our schools. So we started with 2 schools, the first at first, and then 2 weeks later we added 2 more schools, and then 2 weeks later we added 3. So we have 9 schools, but we only actually have 7 that are on this program, because one of them is our alternative school, and they don't eat lunch every day because of their scheduling, and the other one is the high school. And most high schoolers, there's not a lot of reusable food at the high school level. They pretty much take what they're going to eat. So we have the other schools that we do have wasted food at participating. Yes. So we went over, we kind of schooled the kids at each, as we started, we got the principals to announce in their lunchroom that day what we were doing, what we were starting, and what the kids could put in the share bins, and what they couldn't put in the share bins, so they would be aware of that. And on the signs that we had pictures of all the different food. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of one of the signs that we made, but we did have signs that had a yes and a no, what they could put in and what they couldn't put in. And we also, you know, not just my staff, but the school staff, from the principals all the way down, teachers, everybody is all for doing the right thing as far as keeping reusable food that can feed the community out of the trash and into the community where it's needed. And then the other thing that is really neat is, being that it is a share table / donation table, is it allows students that are hungry, that maybe they don't get school lunch, maybe they didn't bring much from home, and they are still hungry. During that lunch period, they're able to go up and take things off the share table to eat. So it's really, it's not just going into the community, it's going back into our school as well, because students are getting full off of the, I mean, we have kids at schools that kind of sit around the share table on purpose because they don't get to have school lunch, and they want some of the things that are going to be put on the share table, and so then they take off of that. And then before it goes into the community, we collect out the non-perishable food. Like we have packaged muffins, we have packaged bagels, we have crackers, trying to think of some other things that go in there, that applesauce cups, packaged raisins, things like that are non-perishable, that our juice boxes that we use are non-perishable. Those we allow the backpack brigade, which I don't know how many districts across the country have that program, but they're where we have groups of people from the community that have backpacks that they fill with food items that needy family, or I guess it's not, students that need food over the weekends. They have food insecurity at home. They take these backpacks home on Fridays and bring them back full, and then on Mondays they bring them back empty. So it provides them with some food over the weekend. So they can take the non-perishable items. They can't take the things that have to stay cold, but anything that they, apples, oranges, things like that. Also, bananas they take out of there and use. So the Backpack Brigade first it feeds students in our school district during the lunch period. Then it feeds the Backpack Brigade students, and then it goes to the community. So it's really impacting a lot of people that are hungry instead of going into the landfill, it's just a win-win every way you look at it.
So Lynn, we're going to be taking questions in about 4 minutes as we get through the rest of the slides.
Okay, so we do have all of our different people that collect our food that we give to. So the Backpack Brigade and Salvation Army and the Bremerton Food Line, they weigh our food per school. They keep it separate. They weigh it per school and they keep track of it. And monthly they call me or email me and let me know how much they collected from each school in poundage of what they collected. And the majority of it is milk. That is something that the kids tend to take, even though they may not have any intentions of drinking it. They take it as just kind of a habit, I guess. We're trying to break that habit. But that is where a lot of the poundage does come from. But as you can see on this slide, we have Almond Jar, Crown Hill, Kitsap Lake, Naval Avenue, View Ridge, West Hills, and Mountain View Middle School. And you can see the poundage there of what they picked up and what the weekly amount is, averaged out to. So pretty much on an average, it's about 3,000 pounds a month. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit less, but on an average, it's about 3,000 pounds a month of reusable food that we keep out of the landfills, and it goes back into our community. So it's great. I mean, it's just been so, and the number of complaints is literally been zero. We haven't had anybody complain on it at all. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Anna.
Oh, yeah. So how it benefits our community is first, we're saving food. We're educating students on how to be compassionate, how not to take more than what they're going to eat. I know they have to take a certain amount, but they don't. They a lot of times they take more than that even still. And so we're trying to teach the kids how to adjust what they're taking to what they're going to eat. Also teaches them compassion. It supports the community, protecting the environment, and we're feeding people. So it's a circle. It's just a great circle there of right thing to do.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. So, so Lynn, we had a lot of questions come in as you went through this, and so there was one question, which is, aside from the health department issue, what were the most challenging obstacles as you were trying to put this program in place in your district?
Okay, I think one of the things that I thought the school board might be opposing it. They weren't, so that was easy. The health department was clearly, it wasn't that they didn't want to do it, is that they felt like their hands were tied and they didn't really want to bridge go over the bridge that they had to make a change. So once we've met that hurdle, after that, it was convincing the staff and the custodians, the people that would be on the hands-on part of it. I mean, the teachers and the principals were all for it, but they wouldn't necessarily be the ones doing the actual work. So it was kind of convincing the staff, the food service staff and custodian staff, that this wouldn't be hard and that it would actually go really well. And once they saw it in motion, then they were like, oh, I guess this isn't that hard. I mean, the custodians were at first a little opposing it, but then when they realized that it was going to make their trash lighter, they were going to actually be throwing away less, they were all for it. We have a lot of student helpers that help with collecting it and putting it into the bins in the refrigerators. So our staff isn't impacted as much as they thought they would be. And it's pretty positive across the board.
Great. So following up on that, there's quite a few questions about, can you just describe how it works actually in the lunchroom? Like, how does this food go? Where does it get stored? Those kinds of questions.
Okay. So that one slide, I don't know if you can go back to it, where it shows the trash cans with that one. Okay, so if you can see right here, we have the students come up, and that white bucket off to the left is where they dump their milk, and then they put their milk cartons in there in the first trash can, and the second trash can is for food and other things that aren't compostable. And then down below there, you'll see this is a small bin. This school doesn't have as much of a recovery as some of the other schools, but because the other schools, some of them have like a 4 or 6 inch bin down there. But as you can see, there's excuse me, an ice sheet in the bottom of that to keep the milk cold, even though the health department hasn't required that, because the time that the milk comes out of the coolers and gets put out and then it goes back in after each lunch period it's not more than 20 minutes max. So they said it's not really necessary to put that. We put it out there because it makes us feel better that we're being extra cautious on keeping the food safe. So they put any item there on the in there that they can. You see, there's a yogurt cup in there. We put cheese sticks in there. Fruit that hasn't been tampered with goes in there, and their tray goes up there. And so then after the lunch period, when it's on a rollable cart, the trays get rolled into the cafeteria, as well as the food share bin down below gets rolled up to the kitchen. Then it gets taken from there and put in the refrigerator. Oh, that was another piece. So we didn't have to have our own refrigerators, but the bins inside the refrigerator where we were using the donation bins, they had to be very clearly marked that said donation bin only, do not reuse, something like that, so that nobody would accidentally open the refrigerator and take something out of the share bin and put back out on the line. So so when that cart gets rolled up to the kitchen, the trays go into to get washed, and the share donations go into the bin in the refrigerator, and then that gets rolled back out for the next lunch period.
So there was kind of a question about how it works with the donation and the share table, and if knowing that the food is going to donation has impacted the kids' willingness to take from the share table, because I think a policy among many schools is that you want kids to eat first.
Yes. So, well, and being that we haven't been allowed to have share tables, it was kind of new to them that, yeah, you can take something off of there if you want to. Is that kind of the question that they're asking? Okay, yes, so it's been really great, and that was one of the things that I know the school board was happy about, was that the food would go back into the school. So it wasn't just going to be taken away from the students, it would be allow students that were hungry and had food insecurities to take off of the share table during the lunch period. So that has been really great. I mean, there's at the middle school, some of these bigger kids, bigger boys that play sports or whatever, they'll drink 2 or 3 or 4 cartons of milk off the share table during their lunch period. So that has just been really great for them. And as far as like the donations getting picked up from the Salvation Army or the Bremerton Food Line, we have it where we know they come within a certain window of time on a certain day, and the staff will have the bin ready kind of like for them in the refrigerator. So they come to the back door, my staff just grabs the bin and hands it to them, and then they give us in turn an empty bin that we put back in the refrigerator. So it's pretty smooth going.
Great. So, so one question that came up for all the presenters, well, one is people are asking about best management practices, and I do know that for the school food share, there was a document list uploaded within the presentation set. We're working on a final document right now based on the work in Bremerton and many other school districts around the area, so that's available to you in terms of best management practices and the resources. And maybe we can ask Nairi and Mary Beth, if you could talk about access to your kind of documents and best management practices?
In terms of access to our documents, you can go to our website at walgreenschools.org, and all of the online resources, the certification, and the classroom supplements that help with that report card, which is part of that certification, that's all accessible for free online. And depending on what state our website is in, sometimes you can log in with a username and like an email address and a password, and other times you don't even have to do that. You can just click in. I guess I need some clarification on the best management practices in terms of monitoring this process of lunchroom food sorting. I think, Lynn, you have a little bit more experience with this, but on the ground, what we've seen is most successful is when the students are involved in monitoring the waste rather than staff. And so if they make it part of their culture and are aware that we're saving food for a reason, both for the environment as well as for our community members, they're happy to get involved. Like I mentioned before, they're really excited to sort the waste, even though it's a messy business sometimes, and but they're eager to do it. And if they're the ones who are rotating through those responsibilities, like second grade manages it on Wednesday, third grade manages it on Friday or whatever, then you have buy-in from the students, and it's more likely to continue than if it's just one adult green team leader who's trying to do all the work themselves, and then they end up getting moved to another school, and then that program kind of collapses. So the more people involved, the better, and the more students involved, the better. They tend to make the changes really happen and get adults' attention rather than one really eager teacher.
Yep, great. Mary Beth, what can you add to that?
Yeah, as far as we actually documented our assessment process in a report, which is on the if you Google Sustainable Energy Committee in the town of Wellesley, Massachusetts, it's on our website. It's at a link on that, so it goes through, it details the assessment and quite well. And in terms of best practices or the engagement piece, I mean, actually, I want to go back to a question that you asked earlier, which was getting people involved and getting people on board. I agree, the students are essential, and giving them as much ownership around the process as possible is really key. But also, it was really important for us to get leaders in our community to take this on board. So the leader, the director of our facilities maintenance department, who oversees all of the custodians, the superintendent's interest in this and support for this was really key, the principal's support. So when those leaders signed on to this and really showed that they cared about it, that really helped everybody else to step up. So I just wanted to add that to my earlier answer.
Great, thank you very much. So there is a question for Lynn, which is at the end of the process, after you've kind of diverted the 3,000 pounds per month, do you know what percentage of your total waste that is and how that's reduced your own waste costs?
Well, I have not made as assessments as well as Mary Beth and Nairi has, but I can say that the custodians have mentioned at every school that I've visited that thank you for doing this because it has decreased their waste. So I would say, as far as what maybe they're paying in term, and I believe that one of my schools even did get to, their trash pickup was twice a week and it went down to one, as you were saying in some of your schools. So yes, it has impacted that, which, as like Nairi was saying, is that once you get administrative to see that it saves them money, then they're all for it. And so yes, I would have to say that it has impacted it in a good way as far as reducing the waste.
Great. There was a question in here also about the USDA requirements for serving food. I think that impacts the entire kind of waste stream that we see in cafeterias. I'm wondering if one of the three of you could talk to that, maybe Lynn, and really kind of share why this issue is occurring.
Okay. Well, the reason why it has, I think, become a little bit more of an issue than it was maybe several years ago is the requirements have become stricter on what students are supposed to take to make it a reimbursable lunch. And there's 5 components that make a reimbursable lunch. There's a grain, milk, a vegetable, a fruit, and a meat or a meat alternate protein. And they have to take 3 of those 5 items. The 5 items are offered every day. They have to take 3 to make it a reimbursable lunch. But the caveat is one of those 3 items has to be a fruit or a vegetable. So a lot of times they'll grab an apple. They don't want to, a lot of times they don't have intentions of eating. I mean, we want them to eat fruits and vegetables. It's healthier for them, but a lot of times students won't eat that. And they do have to take 3 items. Sometimes they don't have, and one of the problems is they run out of time also. If they had a little bit more time to eat, I think they would eat more of the food that they have. But years ago, one of the requirements was milk that they had to take. That is no longer a requirement that they have to take, but because that you have a lot of people that have worked in schools for many, many years, in their mind, they think that they have to take a milk. So you sometimes will have teachers or people that come in and help, and they'll say, you have to take a milk, and they don't have to take a milk. So we're trying to get over that barrier as well as, no, they don't have to take a milk. We're trying to retrain students with that, but it takes a process of time. But so because of that piece is why there's a lot of waste, is because if the USDA says, we're gonna give you money to spend on students to eat lunch, well, you're going to need to make sure that you're spending it and making sure that they have all this food available, a nutritious meal available to them. And so there's requirements in order to get that. So that's kind of where it comes.
Great, thank you. On the other end of this, and this is, I think, really for Nairi and Mary Beth, is there's quite a few questions in here of how do you actually work with the haulers and get the information about how much potential cost savings there is around kind of that waste management. And several people in here have said that they work with really reputable haulers, but they have a lot of trouble actually quantifying and calculating some of that data. So Nairi and Mary Beth.
Well, we've worked closely with our facilities maintenance department. They have they keep very close track of number of pickups and the size of the dumpster. They adjust to really optimize. They've really optimized our hauling system throughout town. So we've worked closely with them, and they really help us to keep track of how things might be changing. We've also had our vendor come out and visit Bates and talk about and particular changes we could make. She's looked over our system and given us some ideas, because we do want to expand and add some elements to what we're doing. And that was really helpful, actually, to have her on site to look at. In terms of keeping track of the costs, we do rely on our custodians and our facilities maintenance department to help us out with that.
I've noticed that waste is measured differently at different schools. And so with our certification program, to make it easier on teachers who don't normally involve themselves with the waste management aspects of their school, we ask them for volume of waste. And that's more easy to track because you can look at the standard size of your dumpster and approximate that, okay, it's actually full or 75% full twice a week. So that's one way we're able to track waste, is the volume, the frequency of pickup, and the contamination rate. I also tell teachers when sometimes they're struggling, they're like, no one knows, how much waste we're making. I can assure you there's someone in that school paying a lot of money to haul that waste away, thousands and thousands of dollars a month. So someone knows, and it may take some time to do a little bit of digging, but there's someone paying to have that waste taken away. So that's one way of trying to quantify your success as well. Do your utility bills, in terms of your waste bill, go up or down depending on the action projects or changes that you make to your school? There are some challenges with some schools where their waste is collected alongside other schools or facilities, and so it's cumulative and difficult to tease apart. Sometimes districts take all the waste and then divide by school and say, you owe 15% of this bill, so it's difficult to track exact weight, but you can get approximates for what your school is contributing to that waste stream.
Great. So one last, I think, fairly kind of easy question for all of our speakers, but came up several times, which is when you're implementing these programs, whether it's a waste sorting program or a school food share program, how long do you need an adult there to help make sure the kids are learning the program? Like how many days should you have a monitor there in the lunchroom?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it really depends on the age of the students. We notice in the schools that we visit with some elementary students that there's always one adult kind of hovering around in the cafeteria while the younger students are helping with the tongs and sorting the waste. But with the older students, if it's an environmental club or after-school program that then does the action during the week, during the day rather, it doesn't take too long to understand what the signs say, what goes where, and then they run it themselves. So, you know, nothing you probably don't know already, but the younger the students, the more monitoring of them. But they tend to catch on pretty quickly. And then with older students, it just becomes part of their culture, their responsibility, and they're able to run it on their own. In fact, a lot of our certifications are completed by students independent of their teachers.
Mary Beth, did you have to add?
I just know that when we implemented our pilot, we had parent volunteers in the cafeteria for about 3 weeks, focused on the youngest of the kids, so the kindergartner through second graders, and that seemed to be a good time frame for that age group to have the adults there for about 3 weeks. We also had some of the older kids teaching the younger kids, which was helpful. But I'd say the fifth graders, maybe a week of adults, of really hands-on adult assistance, and then they're fine. Maybe the third and fourth graders, a couple of weeks, the fifth graders, just 1 week. And then they've been really good to go with just a little bit of supervision after that.
All right, so we'll leave Lynn just a very quick, how long did it take in your school district, and then I'll close us.
Okay. Well, ours wasn't as complicated as yours, Mary Beth. So ours, really, honestly, it took about 2 or 3 days before the students, it became part of their normal cycle. And when we started back in September, because, you know, we only did it for a couple months before the end of the school year, then we had summer, came back to school, and we decided to start the very first day of school right back into it, and it was like it never stopped. So once the kids get the hang of it, it's a pretty normal part of their school day.
Great. So what we're hearing is kids are smart. Great. So with that, we're going to close. And I really want to thank our speakers, Nairi, Mary Beth, and Lynn, for all of your cutting edge work in the world of sustainable materials management in schools. And so thank you very much. I also want to thank all of you who participated today for joining this month's Web Academy, and hope you continue to join us in future months. We will be sending you an evaluation. I hope you complete the evaluation. We read those evaluations and tailor our presentations and speakers to your needs, so please complete that. Please join us for next month's webinar, where we shift back and look at the materials footprint of the consumer electronics ecosystem, and that will be on April 27th. So with that, that concludes today's session, and thank you very much to all of our speakers and our participants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.